Hey, it's Frank. Welcome back to the program. Great to have you with me. It's 21st of May. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Click the like button, the bell for notifications. We appreciate the support. Try to build a little traction here on all YouTube. Check out some hot headlines in the economics world. No data yesterday for the U.S. economy. Had a couple of Fed speakers, some hawkish comments. Markets still anticipate a Fed rate cut or two this year. Not going to change rates in June and probably only one cut this year, if at all. You heard it here from Frankie first. Tuesday today, no data again. Tomorrow, as always, MBA mortgage applications at 7 a.m. For the week ending the 18th, we have a April existing home sales tomorrow and a quiet week on the data front. For the rest of the week, we have new home sales on Thursday for the month of April. As always, on Thursday at 8:30, initial jobless claims. It's become a meaningless number. It's being manipulated in some way. That's about it for Thursday. Then Friday, we have some durable goods orders for the month of April, and then Michigan consumer sentiment for the month of May. President Biden spoke about this index, the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, last week in an interview with CNN regarding the percent of people that support his policies. And just a message to the president and his economics team, the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment is an index, not a percentage. President Biden seems to think it's a percentage. It is not. It's an index. Check in markets real quickly. Markets continue to rally. I'm short the S&P from about 4,900. S&P 500 up 12 today at 5,320. Dow up 59 at 39,866. Remember now, bad news is good news for equity markets. Anything that might cause the Fed to lower rates is good news for stocks. Even though the economy is not doing well and the market's driven really by a handful of companies, earnings are not that great. Yet still, we have this incredible rally in equities continuing. And there's a bunch of FOMO, fear of missing out, that's driving prices even higher from this point. The U.S. 10-year trading 4.41% today, down 2 basis points. We're almost at 5% before the Fed went dovish again, which I mean Jerome Powell. He's done this a few times since December. Hawkish Fed statements, no change in rates, and then dovish statements after the meeting to give a little savior to stock markets. Oil, West Texas Intermediate, down small at $79.06. Natural gas, $2.67. Gold, still bid, although off today, 2,428, near all-time highs. U.S. dollar index, 104.62, up a bit today. Range trading, 104, 105 for a few days now. Dollar yen, 156.16 off the 160 level. And euro against the dollar, 108.60, trading 108, 109 right now as a range for FX. Commodities are bid, led by copper. And again, everything's about the Fed and lowering rates later in the year, which I don't think there's going to be too much of. Bunch of hot topics to talk about in the past few days. The Iranian helicopter crash from Azerbaijan to Iran. Horrible for sure. I know no person on the planet would want to suffer through a helicopter crash. Apparently, they flew right into a mountain in heavy fog. No real indication of any outside influences on this, although the Ayatollah has indicated that it's the U.S.'s fault because we've had sanctions on Iran and they weren't able to get the spare parts to maintain what was a very old helicopter. Some consternation with the fact that NATO and many Western countries are offering condolences to the families about the dead. And this is a tricky little point here. The president was known as the Butcher of Baghdad, has done horrible things over many years, decades, to his fellow Iranians. Jailed them, tortured them, killed them, murdered them. He's part of the effort to squash the efforts by Iranian women to come out from under the thumb of Iranian men when it comes to dressing outdoors. And he's harassed and allowed women to be beaten and treated horribly on the streets of Iran. I'm not sure direct condolences are necessary. We feel bad when anyone dies, no matter what happens, but this was a bad guy, a bad dude for sure. The hush money trial in New York City is over in terms of witnesses. The defense rested today. Former President Trump did not take the stand in his case. And unfortunately, this very, very biased judge, Judge Juan Merchan, continues to harass the defense team in a way that is going to complicate this trial when it comes to appeal. He gave the defense's witnesses, a couple of witnesses, a hard time today and yesterday even, in terms of allowing them to speak. And in fact, one of Trump's witnesses wasn't even allowed to testify. The restrictions imposed by the judge on what can be said and the scope of what can be discussed has been so constrained that one of the witnesses that the defense was going to call, former FEC Commissioner Bradley Smith, wasn't allowed to testify. He said, Judge Mercon has so restricted my testimony that defense has decided not to call me. And this ties right into the core of the case, right? FEC chairman. Remember now, this incident, this misdemeanor, has already been looked at by the federal authorities, by the FEC, and they decided not to pursue charges against Trump or the Trump campaign. So the one witness that the judge did allow, a former New York prosecutor, former attorney for Michael Cohen, Robert Costello, was severely restricted in what he could say. In fact, the judge upheld every objection by the prosecution in every instance. So again, real constraints on what could be asked of the defense witnesses, how they could answer. And apparently Costello was getting pretty aggravated on the witness stand as a result of the judge's unwillingness to let questions stand, to allow him to answer questions. And the judge got so offended, so sensitive, so thin-skinned that he shut down the courtroom yesterday. Asked Costello, are you staring me down? Really remarkable stuff. If Trump is convicted by this jury, this will go to appeal and guaranteed will be overturned. Guaranteed. We'll see if they abuse the Eighth Amendment again, as Bragg did in the documents case with the $100 million fine. So the only other way that this judge can complicate Trump's life is to impose an excessive bail on him if he gets convicted. And so we'll be watching out for that. That'll be interesting. Not a fair trial for Trump, no question. The lawfare stuff is growing old. And apparently last week while Trump was in court, he outraised the Biden administration, the Biden campaign. Other news, I see the Biden administration and Joe Biden himself continues down the wrong path when it comes to energy. Remember now, in January 2021, President Biden signed a litany of executive orders attacking the fossil fuel industry, trying to shut it down, spiked energy prices. That was complicated further by the invasion of Ukraine by Russia a year later. President Biden realized the political trouble he's in as a result of his policy pushing up gasoline prices at the pump has been draining the strategic petroleum reserve that we have for the nation down to its levels not seen since the early 1980s. And in the continuing resolution that was passed to keep the government open in January, part of the legislation required that the Secretary of Energy shall draw down and sell 1 million barrels of refined petroleum product from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve during the fiscal year 2024. But what they're referring to here is the Northeastern Petroleum Reserve, not the National Petroleum Reserve. The Northeast Gasoline Supply Reserve. That's us, those living up in the Northeast. And so that's going to go down to zero. And this has done an effort to lower gas prices by July 4th. Again, blatantly buying votes is the Biden administration. Student loans are another great example of buying votes. Gas prices have been rallying here for most of 2024. And so another bad decision by the Biden administration. Remember, these strategic petroleum reserves, be it the national one or regional ones, are there for the purpose of emergency. They're not there for the purpose of short-term control of gasoline prices. That is not the reason they were put in place. It's about national security, not about elections and votes. So really disappointed to see that for sure. We might benefit a little bit. Gas prices could come down small, but bigger issues drive this. The continuing attacks on the fossil fuel industry by the Biden administration, the ongoing war in Russia, between Russia and Ukraine, the instability in the Middle East, a Chinese economy that's being pumped up very aggressively by the Communist Party in terms of stimulus. And so more likely than not, we're going to see higher gas prices moving forward, regardless of what they've done here. But they've certainly complicated the lives in terms of national security with respect to draining that. I was noticing, back to the Trump hush money case, I was noticing a recent poll called the McLaughlin poll indicates that Donald Trump continues to do well against Biden. In the latest poll, Trump leads Biden 47-43, 1,000 likely voters, 95% confidence interval. Completed on the 15th. 66% of all voters say politics has played a role in the indictments of President Trump. 59% of all voters say Joe Biden has played a role in indictments of President Trump. 53% of all voters think Joe Biden really wants to stop Donald Trump by putting him in jail. So Americans aren't buying this. From the same poll, 68% of voters say the country's on the wrong track. 80% of undecided voters say we're on the wrong track. 57% of voters disapprove of Joe Biden. 81% amongst undecided voters disapprove of Joe Biden. And so the numbers just aren't lining up for the president. And that's very helpful to Trump. But as I've said many times, I still have my money on the Democrats winning in November. And that's because of ballot harvesting and mass mailing of ballots to unregistered voters, and the efforts by the Biden administration to allow illegal immigrants that have come in the country the past few years to vote in the 2024 election. On that basis, Democrats are going to win. Donald Trump needs to be 10 points ahead in any poll to have some confidence that he might win. A story that came out late last week that connects us to President Biden's open borders immigration policy and the record-shattering flow of illegal immigrants into the country. We only got the news last week, but this apparently happened on May 3rd at Quantico, the Marine Corps base. 2 individuals tried to infiltrate the base using a box truck, posing as FedEx delivery men. They didn't have valid identification, and so they didn't get far, and they were stopped. Both of the men in the truck were Jordanian nationals, and one is apparently on the terror watch list. Of course, the person wasn't stopped at the border because there's no vetting at the border. And so speculation is this was a dry run for Al-Qaeda or ISIS to attack the U.S. military. These 2 Jordanian nationals are now in custody, apparently. But this is just a little bit of an indication of the risks that have been put upon the country as a result of President Biden's unprecedented immigration policy, all for the apparent effort to gain votes and diversify the nation. We are going to get hit. We have people entering the country from every terrorist nation on the planet, from all of our enemy countries, from our adversaries, from China. And so domestically, we're at real risk, and we're going to pay the price for that at some point in the future, guaranteed. And tying into that story, there's another story over the past few days that talks about the unprecedented surge in Chinese illegal immigration. People know that are visiting the border in Arizona, California, New York, and Texas. Nationals of many countries are being apprehended. And that includes dozens and dozens and hundreds of Chinese foreign nationals, illegal immigrants entering the country. The indication seems to be many Chinese are seeking employment, and they fly into countries that don't require visas and then make their way into the United States across our southern and northern borders. And the national security decisions, the vetting, that's usually done in a few stages to know who's coming into the country, are no longer made available. We don't know who's coming into the country. And so we have this dangerous loophole that's bringing in foreign nationals that are not likely to be our friends or great citizens. So over the weekend, President Biden was the speaker at Moorehouse College, historic Black university. And it was really quite a divisive speech and really an affront to the Black community, I would think. He told the Black graduates that they are in peril in America, that Republicans don't want them in the country, and that if Donald Trump is elected, they will be disappeared, they will be ignored, they won't be part of the American fabric. Of course, he brought up that horrible lie he's been telling about the Georgia election laws with respect to handing out water for people waiting to vote in line. He says, today in Georgia, well, how about we listen to him?
Today in Georgia, they won't allow water to be available to you while you wait in line to vote in an election. What in the hell is that all about?
Well, that's not true. That is a blatant lie. What he's referring to is something called electioneering. A voting polling place or voters themselves can, in fact, have water and be provided water. If I'm standing in line as a voter and someone's standing behind me and I have water and they don't, I can share my water with them. If the officials at a voting location want to provide water for the people standing in line, they can. What can happen is campaign representatives from any of many campaigns in a given election cycle who electioneer at voting places. It's part of the political process. If you're running a campaign, you want your representatives at the polling spot for one last effort of name recognition, a suggestion, vote for our guy or our woman. And you'll see these people standing at voting locations, and they have to be a certain distance from the voters. And you can't share things with the voters. Now, you can go into the parking lot where they exist. You can meet them in the parking lot and walk with them. But once you approach the voting location, there's going to be an area where campaigning can't happen anymore. It's called electioneering. And that's what the Georgia law is about. You can't buy votes in the last minute. No, I know it's silly to think of water, but you can't come up with this a buffet of food. You can't give people money. You can't electioneer. You can't give voters something at the polling place. You can stand in the allowed area with your campaign sign for the candidate you're representing, and you can hand out cards to them as they approach the voting location. But this is standard practice. But some of these things he said, he told the students of Morehouse College that American democracy has failed the Black community. Well, isn't that on the Democrats? He said he continued fighting the poison of white supremacy. The data doesn't support it. I know the rhetoric does, but the data doesn't. It seemed like he was deliberately trying to sow racial division for cheap political gain. There is some indication that Black voters are leaning more towards Trump than Black voters ever had in terms of Democrat, Republican. Black voters have been hurt very directly by President Biden's immigration policy and the inflation that he's engendered into the economy. To say that democracy has failed the Black community is very destructive. It's not going to help heal racial tensions. Quite a divisive speech, and probably not helpful for what we all want, which is peace and quiet between the races. Lastly, we'll just touch on Israel, Gaza. President Biden and his team continue to try to balance support for Palestinians and Hamas and support for Israel. Right now, we're supporting both sides. We are supporting Hamas, we're supporting Israel, we're supporting the Palestinians, taxpayer dollars. We're providing weapons to the Israelis, we're providing support to Hamas and the Palestinians, we're providing food and support to the Palestinians. And now it looks like the pier off the coast of the Gaza Strip is ready. And instead of President Biden enforcing a red line on both Israel and Egypt to allow humanitarian aid to enter into the Gaza Strip from Israel, from Egypt, from Lebanon, the Egyptians, the Israelis, Hamas, they have all made it very difficult to get humanitarian aid into the region via ground transportation. And instead of President Biden using his power in politics and threats of, you better do this, now we're doing something even more stupid. We're going to bring in humanitarian relief from the Mediterranean Sea via a pier that we've constructed to the tune of $350 million of our taxpayer money. We have the expertise in the military to create these piers, and apparently we've created 2 piers off the coast of the Gaza Strip. And it's going to be very complicated. It's going to be very time consuming. It's going to use a huge amount of energy. So cargo ships will approach a dock anchored off the coast, about 3 miles off the coast. They'll offload their cargo in containers, presumably, on this 3-mile offshore dock. The cargo will have gone under inspection by Israeli authorities in Cyprus. It's going to take some 2,000 trucks to offload one ship. The goods will be brought to the pier that's literally on the coastline and will have to be transported again. So from the cargo ship onto trucks, onto Navy transportation vehicles, unload the trucks onto the pier that's on the coast, and then down a ramp and unload them again. A horrible, horrible method of doing this. Very expensive, huge amount of energy consumption. Global warming people should be very angry at this. And this is not how it should be done. This is the way around. And now, of course, American military personnel are on the scene. They are on the pier 3 miles off the coast. They are on the pier on the coast. They are on the ground right at the end of the pier on the Gaza Strip. And it will be attacked. And this will be a giant failure, another blow up for the U.S. Israel might have an incentive to take out the pier. Of course, Hamas does, Hezbollah does, the Houthi rebels do, Iran does. So really bad news. All right, that's all I have for you today. Always try to buy American.